Okay, it's 11:15. We'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Scruggs. I'm the IT manager at Hobart Service in Troy, Ohio, and I also chair Technology First Infrastructure Cloud Special Interest Group. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to each one of you here with us today at our 14th annual Taste of IT conference. Please join me in thanking our sponsors. At the Diamond level, Cincinnati State; at the Gold level, Cadre Checkpoint and Okta; at the Bronze level, 8451, ComSpark CDO, CyberRabbit, Dell, Exagrid, Extreme Networks, Franklin University, Gigamon, Nexagen, Sinclair, and Smart Data. And to our annual partners, ATC, Affidance, CareSource, Cincinnati Bell, Google, Round Tower, University of Dayton, Wright State University, and Uptime. We couldn't do this without your support. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started with the session. Andrea Wall-Metzger has been a cloud architect specialist for more than 10 years, 7 of which have been at Microsoft. She's a certified Azure administrator, a certified Azure solution specialist, and has been deeply engaged with Microsoft's product teams that are creating the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework and tools to assist customers in adopting Azure. Andrea lives in Centerville and focuses her time at Microsoft on these enterprise customers who are just beginning their cloud journey. Join me in welcoming Andrea Wall-Metzger, Microsoft, as she discusses Is Good Enough Good Enough? Obtaining Governance and Operational Excellence in Azure. Take it away.
Thanks, John. Hey, everybody. I figured before we switch over to my deck, I wanted to say hi from Centerville, and thanks so much for joining the session today. Please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A as we go through, and I'm happy to take questions. And I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end. I'm not sure how much time we'll have, but I'll try to do that as well. So hopefully you guys can see my screen. And like John said, we're going to talk about, governance and governance in Azure, although honestly, most of the topics that we're going to talk about today can be taken across any cloud, whether you're in Google Cloud or AWS or in Microsoft's Azure Cloud. So a little bit about me, like John said, right? My current role is focused on customers that are just starting their cloud journey. So I really work with customers to help them understand how to get started in Azure, what are the best ways to go through it, how do they overcome adoption blockers, and make sure that they have everything they need to be successful in their cloud journey, if you will. I just passed my 8th year at Microsoft, and they've all been in technical roles, as you can see from some of my certifications. And I do have my LinkedIn profile listed there. Please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I do often post a lot of updates about Azure and other cloud services, as well as manufacturing. And as well, there's my email address. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. So I wanted to start today with just a couple of outlines of cloud blockers, right? There's a lot of reasons that a customer may not adopt cloud quickly. And I've kind of found that it falls into 4 main patterns, if you will, right? So the first pattern is security concerns. Things like data sovereignty, access to data, lack of a clear security guidance or clear security strategy from a corporate level, lack of enforcement on policy patterns inside of the cloud, and just a general unknown from customers as it pertains to security inside of the cloud. The second pattern that I see is a lack of strategy, and not just a lack of the actual creation of a strategy, but the lack of communication of a strategy as well, making sure that everyone in the IT organization and potentially shadow IT organizations really understand how the company is planning to do the cloud strategy. The third is knowledge gaps. This is incredibly important to be thinking about. How do you make sure that your resources are skilled and skilled appropriately for the services that you're planning on implementing into the cloud? And the fourth is just a fear of change, right? A lot of times we have customers that think about this is the way that we do it on premises, and therefore this is the way that we're going to do it in the cloud. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way, right? So you really have to start to think about changing your IT policies and processes to make sure that you're really focusing on what's the best way to do it in the cloud, not just the way that you've always done it. So when we think about that, change is really about more than just adopting the technology. It's much more than just saying we're going to move to the cloud. It's more about how do you change your business And those adoption blockers that I just outlined for you can really all be addressed with governance and governance in the cloud. So Microsoft created a framework called the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and that really helps you address how you change the way that you do business. So it's not just swapping out technology, but it's changing how you do your enterprise, how you handle the culture around cloud technology, et cetera. So what we do is we're bringing together people, processes, and technology to align all of those to your business goals, right? So it helps you achieve those business goals faster, and it helps you to deliver those fast results. And that's kind of what governance is meant to do today. And well, why is governance important, right? We know that governance can help these cloud blockers. So obviously it's good to help you on the remove the blockers, but why else is it important? Well, it's important because it's the balance between transformation and risk mitigation, right? So when we can add governance into a cloud deployment, we're helping to maintain full compliance. We're helping to create better cost visibility and better control. We're helping to improve an overall security posture. And more importantly, we're helping you be agile, right? The whole point of moving to the cloud in the first place. But how do you know when there's enough, right? When is good enough good enough? When is there enough governance in the environment? I've literally seen customers go an entire year to create their governance strategy and to come up with an overall plan before they even move one workload into the cloud. So we have to take a minute and say, you can overanalyze this, and let's get out of the analysis paralysis. So governance should be an iterative process, right? It should be something that supports your business, but that also evolves with your business. So we really want to make sure that we're looking at governance from an iterative state and kind of building that good enough strategy, if you will. So the way that we do that is we build that adoption for cloud governance in an iterative state. So the first thing that you do is you have to understand the methodologies, right? And we just kind of talked about that, right? There's something called the Cloud Adoption Framework in Azure. Every cloud has their own methodology for understanding and creating that baseline of governance. And then the second thing that you have to do is actually to create a benchmark. So let's talk about benchmarks and what does a cloud benchmark mean? So to help you get started with this, Microsoft actually created a tool called the Governance Benchmark Tool. And what this does is it asks you a bunch of questions that help you get down to that singular component that is the most important for this project. So if you're thinking about a cloud project and something that you want to put into Azure or to any other cloud, for example, you need to take a step back and understand for your good enough governance model, what's important to you for this particular workload, right? What exactly is it that you need to focus on to be successful just for this workload? And so when you use this governance benchmark tool from Microsoft, it'll come out with a really nice chart to give you your current state, your baseline, if you will, your governance baseline. So it asks you a series of questions about processes, security, identity, cost management, all kinds of things like that, and then gives you this great chart that helps you to be able to see what's important. So for this chart here that you can see this example from this company that went through, you'll see that security management was a key area of focus. So for this particular workload, for the governance that's required for this workload, we know that we need to focus on security. And therefore that becomes one of the main components of this iterative model of governance. So once you have that, right, you've got that governance benchmark, you know what's going to be important for you for this particular phase of the project. The next step is to create that governance model. So a governance model is really just a way to envision your end state. And remember, it's a way that you incrementally build trust and confidence in the cloud and in that particular deployment for your company. So when we think about how governance models work, the very first thing that we do is we create that corporate policy, right? That's what we did in that baseline. We're creating the corporate policy. We're understanding the business risks that we have to understand for this project. We're understanding what policies and compliance components need to be in place for this project. And then we're understanding what processes have to be in place in order for this project to be successful. And then we dive into the governance components themselves. And this is where we like to think of it in ways of 5 disciplines of governance. So the first discipline of governance is cost and cost management. Costs are incredibly important as we move into the cloud. There's definitely times where it's not going to be cheaper to go into the cloud versus being on premises. And as you start to move into the cloud, you want to be able to take advantage of some of the features that help you to maybe turn off processes or auto scale up or auto scale down. And so cost management and how you can report costs, how you can understand your budgets, how you can potentially even tie costs back to other organizations in the company, that becomes a big discipline that you need to understand. The second is a security baseline. This is self-evident, right? Security is always paramount in most companies that I deal with. And if you have that baseline for security as a part of your governance, that's going to be another important step. The third is resource consistency, and I can't stress this one enough. Resource consistency makes it so that whenever anyone creates things in the cloud, they're creating it based on the specific policies and risk assessment components and compliance components that you've put into place that you've defined in that very top part, right, for the corporate policy. So being able to understand, are resources named the same? Do they have the same security settings? Do they do the same logging components, et cetera? The fourth one is identity. Identity is the crux of pretty much everything in the cloud today, right? So you need to make sure that you have that baseline for identity components. And these are things like roles-based access controls and roles assignments so that they're consistent across the governance model. And the last one is deployment acceleration. Obviously, one of the huge benefits of moving to the cloud is being able to get to an infrastructure as code type of model. And that helps you to accelerate deployment. It helps you to be able to have better standardized processes and to standardize templates across the entire organization. So when you think of governance, think of those 5 disciplines: cost management, security baseline, resource consistency, identity baseline, and deployment acceleration. But remember, don't go into analysis paralysis when we think about these. So the best way to start a project in the cloud, whether it's your first project or your 201st project, is to think about incremental governance execution, the good enough model, right? And we like to term it as called an MVP, a minimally viable product. So what you want to do is you want to start small and establish a minimally viable product that will evolve with you on a project by project basis, something that will actually meet those risks that you outlined in that baseline and help you to move the project forward. And to do that, really, you have to focus on 3 of those disciplines: your security baseline, your resource baseline, and your cost baseline, right? So you want to take a look at those main baselines up front to help you create that very first good enough governance model. So let's talk about what those mean. So how do we establish those baselines, right? What are the baselines coming through today? So security baseline. The security baseline is all about establishing those policies to help protect you, right? To help you outline your security iterations for network, hybrid identity, encryption, data, assets. How are you communicating across all of this? How are you ensuring that your stakeholders and your data are secure as you're putting things into Azure? But again, think of it as a baseline, right? The good enough. What do you need specifically for this particular workload as you move into the cloud? And when it comes to Azure, we do have a number of tools and services that'll help you here, right? Things like Azure Policy, Security Center, Sentinel, subscription design, hybrid networking, Azure automation. There's many, many more that we can talk about. But the key is to set those initial policies and those initial security components just for your main project. And then we move into the resource consistency, right? Resource consistency, again, is that foundational component so that you can find your resources, so you know what they're doing. Things like naming conventions, tagging, understanding security components and audit logs help you to be able to find resources and make sure they're consistent across every single deployment that you do and every workload, whether, again, it's your first workload or your 201st, you need to make sure that you have that resource consistency baseline. The next one is identity. And this, again, goes back to things like roles-based access control, your access management processes and policies, privileged identity management. So for this particular application, do you need to do something like lockbox in your environment? Do you need to add additional compliancy controls onto your identity? Do you need to make sure that only authorized people can even access these components and or access them from a particular network in your environment, for example? So look at that identity component. And remember cost, right? Cost is establishing those controls to give you the proper allocation of cost across business units to help you implement those guardrails, something like not allowing specific types of SKUs. So in Azure, one of the things that I have my customers do a lot is I say, create a policy in your environment that makes it so that users can only create a particular type of virtual machine. Maybe it's a type of virtual machine that's a development type versus, one of our larger 128, gig of RAM, terabytes of space, et cetera, right? Just make sure you put those guardrails in place so that people aren't running rampant when it comes to implementing things in your environment. In Azure, we provide you a bunch of native tools, right? Across all of these disciplines, across all of these baselines for things like resource consistency, deployment acceleration, et cetera. So you'll find things like Azure Blueprints come in play, Azure Policies, automation, the Azure Active Directory components for baseline, and many, many more. And any of your Microsoft reps would be happy to talk to you about how you can make governance actionable with these specific tools. But as we create this entire baseline and you create your entire minimally viable product, your MVP, please, please, please document your decisions. I can't stress this enough. One of the biggest things is you're creating a cloud environment is for you to outline the decisions that you have made and why you made those decisions, as well as what alternatives you reviewed before you made those decisions. Having something like a decision record. And there's a link here and an example, right? There's a whole bunch of decision records out on GitHub. You might have one inside of your company today, but anything that you can do to document those decisions is going to make life easier. Because when you're on your 201st project, you want to look back at the decisions that you made in your first project as to those security, the identity, the cost baselines, et cetera, so that you can actually maybe evolve them, maybe change them, or maybe even keep them as you go through, right? Documenting those decisions becomes incredibly important, much more important in a cloud environment than it does in your on-premises environment. And besides documenting your requirements and documenting your decisions, I highly recommend you create a skills plan. Being able to have people skilled in the environment, remember, that's one of those cloud blockers. So when we have people skilled in the environment, we can move much faster. We can have much faster adoption. So you want to take those roles that you might have across the organization and map those back to what they need inside of the individual technology that you're creating, right? So if you have a relationship manager or a business architect, what is the role of that business architect for this particular project, right? Again, think small. Don't think about, your analysis paralysis. Don't think about all of Azure or all of your cloud. Think about, for this project, what is the role of my developer? What is the role of my networking team? What is the role of my cloud architect? And what do they need to do to help me get this project through? So again, from an MVP perspective, it's about being good enough. So we create those first baseline components, those first MVP components, identity, security, consistency, cost management, and then we deploy those MVP components into our environment. One of the things that we like to talk about in Microsoft is the concept of landing zones. So the landing zone is something that you create initially on your very first project to help you understand and put in place that required plumbing. The landing zone is basically, think of it as a runway in a major airport. You've got a specific landing zone that's always the same, that is where you put things, where you come to land with your individual projects. So when you put that plumbing in place with the landing zone, this is where you can grow over time, where you can enhance that landing zone based on the changes to your security policy, your identity policy, et cetera, right? That landing zone is your good enough. That's your first iteration, but it doesn't have to be your final destination. Okay, so you've got your baseline, right? We created that initial governance foundation. We established our initial governance components. Now what do? Well, now what we do is we get into that iterative component, right? We want to then iteratively add to those governance controls over time to address further risks, further workloads, further projects in the environment, right? That's the getting to better. So once we've done the creation, we've done the deployment, now we're looking at the assessment. Are you getting enough information from costs? Are your resources locked down? Do you have any kind of security concerns through this particular project? Are you able to find things? Are you able to monitor things? Are your resources being consistently deployed? These are the things that you want to think about in this next step, your next iteration of your governance model to help you to get to better. So when we think about that landing zone, right? Remember the landing zone that we created for that first governance model, this is where we expand it. So when you expand your landing zone, you're adding configurations for operational excellence. You're adding configurations for reliability, for security, for handling sensitive data. You're just adding more broadly to that overall cloud environment. And more importantly, you're getting to something called enterprise scale. So you don't necessarily have to, in that first project, have an enterprise scale project. This could be where your next iteration of your governance model is taking that to the enterprise scale. Think about agile technologies and agile code and the way that we're going much faster in deploying projects. It applies into a governance model as well. So the second iteration is where we think about enterprise scale, and we're doing enterprise design principles like availability of overall design components that enhance your landing zone. And that then is where we've kind of taken all of this cloud efficiency, all of these governance components, and we've kind of pulled them together into, one neat little good enough package, right? So we focused on those 4 main exercises: understanding the methodology, creating that governance benchmark, creating your initial governance foundation, and then evolving that foundation through time. So as we recap, because I wanted to make sure we leave a little bit of time for a Q&A, governance should help you achieve balance. Governance is not about blocking. It is not about making it difficult to go into the cloud, because we want to have that speed. We want to have that agility. It's about balance of the control and the stability versus the speed and results. Governance should be iterative. It should evolve with your business. It should be something that changes over time and changes potentially from project to project. There's 5 disciplines to governance. Remember, as you're creating your governance model, you need to think about cost. You need to think about security, resource consistency, the identity components, and deployment acceleration. And start small. Start with an MVP, a minimally viable product, with a couple of those baselines, and then establish a landing zone for your first adoption workload. And lastly, evolve, right? It's an iterative process. You want to eventually evolve your landing zone, evolve your minimally viable product into a much more concrete and larger governance component, add those enterprise features, and then reassess and do it all over again. So what's a call to action? The call to action is to start your governance journey. If you haven't already started your governance journey for your movement into the cloud, take the governance benchmark assessment tool, right? I've got a link in here. It's also in the resources at the end of this slide. Take that benchmark assessment tool. That, again, will really help you understand what's important to you for this project. What stands out as to the things that you need to focus on for your first governance model and that first iteration of governance and operational excellence in your environment. And then learn how to leverage a landing zone. The landing zone concept, again, can be carried whether it's across Azure, AWS, Google, or any other cloud that you're working in today. That same concept is something that'll help you get started and get started quickly. Define your initial governance baseline and then create that MVP and get to the cloud. So that is all I have for you today. Again, I do have a bunch of resources at the end, but I would love to take questions if anybody has any questions.
For those of you watching on YouTube, if you could head back to the Taste of IT app, ask your questions there in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that feed. Right now, Andrea, I don't see any, but we do have a few minutes.
Yeah, we have a few minutes. I wanted to wrap up fairly quickly. John, I'll ask you some questions since we're here for the rest of the people listening. You mentioned that at your company you guys use Azure and you use a lot of cloud products. Have you created a governance model?
So I think we would classify as one of those customers that you talk to is really early on in the cloud journey, right? So we're in the early stages, and this is actually the session was very helpful for me to start putting together that policy. So I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah, good to know. It's definitely when we think about customers that are making that first journey into the cloud, it can be overwhelming, right? But we tend to stop and think, you've done this before. There's IT organizations have created these policies for on-premises, but you created them a long time ago, right? The chances are that you have cost baselines, identity baselines, security baselines for everything on premises that you have today. It's just a matter of taking that and translating it into a cloud environment, right? And so it can be daunting. So the best way to do it is just break it up, right? Just let's focus on a project. I always tell my customers, forget all the rest of it. Give me one project, give me one workload, and let's focus on that. And we'll create all of this governance structure around the workload, because then it makes sense. And then it's much easier to learn as we go on that particular governance model. And then we can put that in place, come back and assess it, and then change it as we need to. Let's see,
Absolutely.
any other questions? I don't see any questions popping up yet into the Q&A, but I'm around. Feel free to email me. I'll let me go back to the first page here, and you guys are, welcome to email me with any kinds of questions that you have. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I'm sorry, I post a lot of things all the time on LinkedIn. On manufacturing, because I am in the manufacturing organization, as well as on governance models, on security, on cloud trends in the organization, on education components, etc. So happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'll pop back to that slide. Oops, there we go. So there's my LinkedIn profile. Again, feel free to follow me, and there's my email address. I'm always happy to provide you with either a Microsoft resource that might match your company, or even just have a conversation with you on my own. As I said, I'm in Centerville, so happy to have a coffee if COVID would ever allow at some point in time. But thank you guys so much for coming to the conversation today. I really appreciate it. I hope that this helped you, and I will make slides available to Caitlin and team as well. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Andrea. That is very helpful for me personally. I think it'd be helpful for everybody else that was watching today. A special thanks to Exagrid, our featured sponsor for this session. And I wanted to remind everybody to complete the survey for each session by finding the link in My Agenda session descriptions, which was the same place you clicked to join this session here. By participating in the survey, you make your voice heard and are helping shape the future of Technology First events. So thank you for taking the time to fill out that survey. So now it's time to take a break. Our next session is, I believe, at 12:15. It's our lunch keynote. So grab a snack now, go visit exhibitors, and explore the event platform. There are game codes you can earn by exploring the app, so go to the event game tab to learn more there. And the game code for attending today's session is governance. Thank you so much, and we'll see y'all soon.